and welcome to another episode of Radio Westeros. I'm Lady Guinevere in Boston.
And I'm Yolkboy in England. Welcome to our first ever Patron episode, unlocked by our patrons. First of all, thanks to all of you for collectively sponsoring us, and now we have something for you.
Yeah, today's episode will be exclusive to patrons for the foreseeable future. Most likely one day we'll release it to the wider public, but not for a good while, so sit back and enjoy knowing that you all made this happen. And really thanks to every one of you, but while we're saying thanks, a big shout out to our Flaming Lightbringer patron, TJ Harrington, to our brand new Dragonsteel patron, Peter, and to our Pale as Milk Glass patrons, Rosa, Rory, Ashley, Laura, and Sister Winter.
So today's episode is all about Varamyr Sixskins, an intriguing tertiary character who gains POV status in the prologue of A Dance with Dragons. His story is dark, twisted, and often taboo, as our episode title today, Abomination, suggests. However, beneath that veneer is a great Martinian tragedy that can be missed on a first read. We find it to be one of the most heart-wrenching stories in A Song of Ice and Fire, and certain aspects really bring a tear to our eyes.
Yeah, they do. And in Varamyr's point of view chapter, it gives us a very scattered view of his life and backstory. We counted 37 flashbacks and remembrances, which we think is more than you'll find in any other chapter. As such, his story is a tangled web, and today we'll be unraveling his arc and presenting it from left to right in order to get a more clear view of his life and the progression of his personality.
Yeah, we've rearranged all these fragments into chronological order, and we'll be presenting Varamyr with the flow that the prologue purposefully obscures. And we'll begin today by looking at his youth, formative years, and his family life.
And then we'll talk about his relationship with Haggon, whose identity he assumes in the prologue. We'll also consider the time he spent with Mance, including the information we get in A Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords when we meet Varamyr through the eyes of Jon Snow.
And eventually we'll get to the prologue timeline and see what kind of man Varamyr really is. We'll also pay close attention to the mysteries associated with Varamyr and his chapter, which is the best prologue in our opinion. The writing is truly excellent. With 3 readings today, a pseudo-advert, and more skin-changing than a Bolton flaying knife, that will be our look at Varamyr Sixskins. And we hope you enjoy. Men may eat the flesh of beasts, and beasts the flesh of men, but the man who eats the flesh of man is an abomination. Abomination. That had always been Haggon's favourite word. Abomination. Abomination. Abomination.
Okay, so as we said, we're starting out with a look at what we know about Varamyr's youth. In the A Dance with Dragons prologue, we learn about Varamyr and his brother in a dream. It says, "He dreamt an old dream of a hovel by the sea, 3 dogs whimpering, a woman's tears." Now, some of you might have experienced some déjà vu when I read that line. It might have seemed eerily familiar. And that's because George more or less repeats that line, changing the details, but retaining the same pattern 3 times during the books.
Yeah, he does. He is Ned Stark in A Game of Thrones. He dreamt an old dream of 3 knights in white cloaks and a tower long fallen, and Lyanna in her bed of blood.
And here's Cersei in A Feast for Crows. She dreamt an old dream of 3 girls in brown cloaks, a wattled crone, and a tent that smelled of death.
And here's the Varamyr quote again. He dreamt an old dream of a hovel by the sea, 3 dogs whimpering, a woman's tears.
So, 3 old dreams, 3 knights, 3 girls, and 3 dogs. You can see the uncanny resemblance and the purposeful repetition there in these extracts that are separated by hundreds of pages. The depth of George's creation never ceases to amaze us, and we love details like this. As for the literary purpose, this underscores that Ned, Cersei, and Varamyr all have something in common. Dreaming an old dream indicates it's both something from a long time ago and that it's recurred in the characters' minds. So these characters are all haunted by something from their distant past, sources of pain, a dying sister, a terrible prophecy, the death of a brother. All these events have shaped them.
And we learn that Varamyr was first named Lump by his sister when he was merely a lump in his mother's tummy. We can assume his sister Miha was young and perhaps just saying what she saw, given the next baby name she chose followed the same pattern.
And unfortunately for Lump, he was born a month early. Now, certainly in a medieval setting, this was pretty dangerous, and Lump was probably lucky to be alive. However, seemingly as a result of the premature birth, Lump was very sickly, though he continued to defy the odds by living through his early days. As a weakling, we can suppose that Lump might have needed his mother more than most children, that he was very needy of her. What strain the pregnancy and the subsequent illness put onto Lump's mother, who can say, but in a culture like the Wildlings where strength is valued and weakness is barely tolerated, we can guess that she might not have been overjoyed with her child. Maybe she resented him, and really through no fault of his own.
And there's evidence of Lump's parents undervaluing him in the fact that he should have been given a new name. Gilly informs us that wildlings don't give proper names to their children until they're around the age of 2. Because so many children die in infancy, in their culture it's deemed bad luck to name them and therefore to form a full attachment with them until after they're 2, which is considered a safe age.
But Lump was still Lump at age 4, and we think the insinuation is that his parents didn't think he was going to survive all that time. This must have felt terrible for Lump, like his parents were just waiting and waiting for him to die, and perhaps not sealing their commitment to him as their child.
And by the time he was 4, quote, the whole village had taken to calling him Lump. And while he was given a proper name around that time, Varamyr recalls that by then it was too late. And while we can only wonder what name his parents finally gave him, the one that stuck, Lump, is hardly the most flattering of names, and one can imagine it may have stuck to the boy on account of some perceived weakness or uselessness. It seems young Lump was destined to be an outlier from day one, and being called an undesirable name by everyone you know must have been hurtful.
So, sometime between his 3rd and 4th name day, by our estimations, his mother conceived another child. And we wonder if this is the reason why Lump was finally, but apparently offhandedly, given a proper name around the age of 4. Mia named the new unborn child Bump, who was born at full term, and in stark contrast to Lump, was, quote, big and red and robust. Lump watched as the new child, quote, sucked greedily in his mother's teats, a detail that George might have included to imply jealousy from the elder brother of the shift in maternal attention. At this stage, and we'll aptly put this in wolf terms, Lump must have been feeling a little like the runt of the pack.
And to compound the situation, to further add to his sense of familial displacement, as Bump neared his 2nd name day, Lump's parents planned to name the little one with his father's name, surely a mark of high honour within the family. Here's Lump not even given a proper name until years beyond the normal time, and his little brother, aged 2, is going to take the pride of the family. It paints a sad picture of Lump, and at this point we want to consider for a second if this character is worthy of sympathy, considering just what's been said so far and putting the blinkers on to what he does in the future.
Well, when you read about Varamyr in the books, you already know the evils he's done, and so when you get to this Lump story, it's kind of hard to feel any sympathy. But when you look at his arc chronologically, from left to right, I think you'll agree it's easier to see the pathos in his story and character. He's an undervalued, unfavored, and perhaps even unloved child, and it quite understandably makes him jealous. Perhaps this explains why he describes the family's 3 pet dogs, Loptail, Sniff, and the Growler, as his friends.
Yeah, maybe he preferred the company of those dogs to that of humans. It's possible they weren't just his friends, but were his only friends. And there's nothing too atypical about such canine friendships until you consider Lump's great secret. It's an irony that the useless, sickly Lump harboured a great gift that could see him honoured as well as feared in his community. Lump was a skin changer.
Okay, and so let's quickly define skin changers. It's someone who can inhabit the mind of an animal. It's a similar term to warg, yet slightly different. In a fan correspondence from 2000, George said, "A warg is bound to a wolf, while skin changer is a more general term. All wargs are skin changers, not all skin changers are wargs."
So if you inhabit a wolf, you are a warg and a skin changer. If you inhabit animals apart from a wolf, you're a skin changer. So as far as we know, Borok is a skin changer because he can inhabit boars, yet there's no evidence he's done the same with wolves, so he might not be a warg. We kind of hope that clears up things for anyone who was confused. It is a little bit confusing. But anyway, how often are skin changers born is another question, and Bloodraven tells us that only 1 man in 1,000 is born a skin changer. And this is beyond the scope of discussion today, but briefly, we think it's very likely skin changing in humans comes from first men interbreeding with the children of the forest. Finally, we should list the skin changers in the main series, and these are the skin changers that you'd say are the confirmed canon skin changers. So you have Varamyr, Haggon of course, Orel with his eagle, Borok and his boar, the once mentioned Grisella and Briar, a goat woman and shadow cat respectively. Then there are the Starks, a freak occurrence it seems, but that's a story for another time. Bran, Jon and Arya are all wargs and therefore skin changers confirmed in the text. And while we have only hints about the other siblings, George has commented that in fact all the Stark kids are wargs, so make of that what you will.
Anyway, getting back to Varamyr. It seems that one day, perhaps dreading the attention Bump would get from both an upcoming name day combined with the humiliation of the youngster about to receive their father's name, Lump decided neither was going to happen. Whether it was planned or more spontaneous, nobody can say exactly. But it seems Lump took the skin of one of the dogs and, it's heavily implied, killed the boy. There is some ambiguity, which is typical of the style of the chapter, but there's a huge clue that it was Lump when he thinks, Bump sees, he is watching me, he knows.
Lump's father, who like his mother is never named by Varamyr, such as they had done unto him, found the body of the boy with the 3 dogs sniffing around it, by which time Lump had returned to his own body. Given that Varamyr thinks that Haggon's body was where he learned the taste of human flesh, it could be that Lump, as a dog, shook the boy to death and didn't actually taste or kind of eat him. Although it is notable that Varamyr does like to eat human babies as a wolf.
Ew. Okay.
It is gross.
Yeah. All right, so Varamyr's shaking father didn't know which of the dogs had done it, and so he slew Sniff and the Growler with an axe. Lump then skin changed Loptail, and as the axe crashed down and the dog died, he returned to his own body with an audible scream of pain. That was how they knew, it says. Lump was 6 years old, and this was his first death. He goes on to die 8 more times inside of animals before his, quote, true death.
And Lump must have been present at Bump's funeral because he heard a woods witch leading the ceremony, and the words she spoke go on to haunt him. This is a really important passage for understanding Varamyr's religious belief system that will come up again later. She said, "The gods have taken him down into the earth, into the trees. The gods are all around us, in the rocks, in the streams, in the birds and beasts. Your Bump has gone to join them. He'll be the world and all that's in it." And Varamyr's thoughts at this are revealing. The old woman's words had gone through Lump like a knife. Bump sees. He is watching me. He knows. Lump could not hide from him.
So, in accordance with his culture, Lump believes that when you die, you become part of the trees, part of the environment and nature, part of everything. So now Bump is everywhere. He cannot escape his presence, and of course this causes guilt and trepidation in Lump, still only 6 years old. And it's this belief which really haunts him for the rest of his life.
And of course at the funeral, his mother cries. Even as an adult, Varamyr is jealous and angry that his mother cried here, but didn't cry when he had to leave the village, recalling her tears in his dream. She weeps for Bump, but she never wept for me. In all cases of Lump's regrets, he seems sorry for the consequences of his actions inasmuch as they've affected him or even the dogs, yet he doesn't really display proper empathy to the direct victim of his actions, in this case Bump.
And of course that outlook is perfectly normal for a very young child, but typically as people mature and age, they begin to acquire things like empathy and responsibility for their own actions, which is something we don't really see in Lump or Varamyr. So interesting. And anyway, 2 days after the funeral, Lump's father pulled him from his bed and took him into the woods. His mother wouldn't even look at him, and as mentioned, didn't cry, feeding into what can only be described as abandonment issues. His own mother had abandoned him as well, it says, and we learn that Lump thought he was going to die there and then, but his father handed him over to Haggon instead. "You belong with your own kind," was all he said as he flung him down at Haggon's feet.
So overall, a really, really interesting backstory, we think, and we both feel pretty conflicted about some of it, in that Lump is probably deserving of some sympathy, and it's easy to forget he was a lonely and possibly neglected 6-year-old when he killed a defenseless babe who happened to be his little brother. It's worth noting, though, that this is kinslaying, an absolutely huge taboo, yet Varamyr never thinks of himself in those terms. Given the evidence of Varamyr's strong belief in the old gods, who, quote, hate kinslayers even when they kill unknowing, according to fellow wildling Egret, the reader can wonder why Varamyr doesn't think of himself directly as a kinslayer. Later, we see Varamyr try to reason with himself that there is a distinction between sins committed as a man and those committed whilst in the skin of an animal, attempting to excuse himself of morally repugnant deeds, so you can see how his mind operates. And coming up next, we'll look at Lump's time with Haggon. But first, here's a rather harrowing reading. This is the tale of Lump and Bump.
Lump had been born a month before his proper time, and he was sick so often that no one expected him to live. His mother waited until he was almost 4 to give him a proper name, and by then it was too late. The whole village had taken to calling him Lump, the name his sister Miha had given him when he was still in his mother's belly. Miha had given Bump his name as well, but Lump's little brother had been born in his proper time, big and red and robust, sucking greedily at mother's teats. She was going to name him after father. Bump died, though. He died when he was 2 and I was 6, 3 days before his name day. "Your little one is with the gods now," the woods witch told his mother as she wept. "He'll never hurt again, never hunger, never cry. The gods have taken him down into the earth, into the trees. The gods are all around us, in the rocks and streams, in the birds and beasts. Your Bump has gone to join them. He'll be the world and all that's in it." The old woman's words had gone through Lump like a knife. Bump sees. He is watching me. He knows. Lump could not hide from him, could not slip behind his mother's skirts or run off with the dogs to escape his father's fury. The dogs. Loptail, Sniff, the Growler. They were good dogs. They were my friends. When his father found the dogs sniffing round Bump's body, he had no way of knowing which had done it, so he took his axe to all 3. His hands shook so badly that it took 2 blows to silence Sniff and 4 to put the Growler down. The smell of blood hung heavy in the air, and the sounds the dying dogs had made were terrible to hear, yet Loptail still came when father called him. He was the oldest dog, and his training overcame his terror. By the time Lump slipped inside his skin, it was too late. "No, father, please," he tried to say, but dogs cannot speak the tongues of men, so all that emerged was a piteous whine. The axe crashed into the middle of the old dog's skull, and inside the hovel, the boy let out a scream. That was how they knew. He knows. The dogs, Loptail, Sniff, the Growler. They were good dogs. They were my friends.
Okay, so we really hope that you enjoyed that reading. We try to make it as atmospheric and sad as possible, befitting the story, which, with the death of Bump and 3 innocent dogs from the actions of a 6-year-old boy, is not only a fantastic mini-story, but also a great tragedy. And from the sadness of that story, we progress to the next stage in Lump's life and arc, his time with Haggon.
So Lump was handed over to Haggon, like a criminal flung down at the man's feet. His parents had now lost both of their sons, as they would never see Lump again. Whether the boy was spared from his father's axe because of a kinslaying taboo, or whether it was due to some form of respect existing amidst the inherent fear of skin changers in wildlings, is hard to say, but as Lump lost one father, he apparently gained another in Haggon.
And in a more nurturing environment, guided by fellow skin changer Haggon, Lump began to believe in himself. He became ambitious. It says, The boy had dreamed of a day when bards would sing of his deeds and pretty girls would kiss him. "When I am grown, I will be the king beyond the wall," Lump had promised himself.
And when Lump got to the age of 10, it seemed to be a turning point for him. There are 3 events at this age that are mentioned, which all seem to have influenced him heavily. First of all, around this time, Haggon took him to Eastwatch. There, Haggon and Lump traded with the Night's Watch. We can imagine it was an exciting time for the boy, as he recalls trading ships laden with goods from the fabled lands beyond the sea coming in. Sometimes travel can broaden a child's mind, and it was these visits to Eastwatch that first caused Lump to dream of the warm south, and more on that later.
Again at the age of 10, Lump was taken by Haggon, who definitely has the air of a foster father by now, despite Lump describing him as tall and grim, to a gathering of skin changers. It says, "The Wargs were the most numerous in that company, the Wolf brothers, but the boy had found the others stranger and more fascinating. Barok looked so much like his boar that all he lacked was tusks. Orel had his eagle, Briar her shadow cat, and the goat woman Grisella."
Yeah, and this is a moment where Lump became curious about skin-changing various animals and expanding his skill set wider and beyond that of his tutor Haggon, who was more inclined to be cautious. It's noted that at this meeting, seeing Briar with her shadow cat made Lump want one of his own. Given that we find out that Haggon had warned him to leave certain beasts alone, including cats, which were, quote, vain and cruel, always ready to turn on you, we can see the genesis of a familiar dynamic, the pupil surpassing the master.
The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
That was Darth Vader to Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. So this is a trope that's well established in popular culture. Varamyr thinks, "He taught me the way of the Warg and the secrets of the skin changer, though my gift was stronger than his own." And so overall, the roots of the future conflict between them lies here. And in this trope, the student often proves superiority by killing the teacher, which is exactly what happens here.
And the third major event of Lump's 10th year comes when he finally takes an adult name, Varamyr. Lump took it upon himself to take a new name, replacing the name his parents gave him that never stuck, and the hated nickname Lump, with Varamyr, which he chose because it was, quote, a name fit for a lord, a name for songs, a mighty name and fearsome.
So you can see, at age 10, Lump wanted his Sansa-esque daydreams of kissing girls and being the subject of songs to become reality. And in naming himself, he's able to reinvent himself, to cast aside the useless Lump. And we see characters taking new names and their identity changing countless times through this series. It's no wonder to us that there have been so many hidden identity theories. And combining this reinvention, his ambitions, his powerful gift, and his unscrupulous, corruptible nature, we can see how the adult Varamyr came about.
And more on that later. Let's continue now to look at Varamyr and Haggon in these formative years. As we've said, Haggon was essentially a foster father, and he taught the boy how to survive, as well as providing skin-changing coaching. It says, Haggon taught me much and more. He taught me how to hunt and fish, how to butcher a carcass and bone a fish, how to find my way through the woods.
So Varamyr, in a sense, was very lucky to have Haggon by all accounts, and there is no mention of any cruelty of any sort by the man. Like we said, friction between the pair seems to have evolved from the student-master dynamics, and we've pulled together everything that we know of that Haggon tells Varamyr about warging and skin changing. So this is Skinchanging 101 with Master Haggon. Please put your hand up if you have any questions.
Okay, so first of all, there's this. Wolves and women wed for life, Haggon often said. You take one, that's a marriage. The wolf is part of you from that day on, and you're part of him. Both of you will change. This lets us know that skin changing is a two-way process, and that it can change you.
Next we have, other beasts were best left alone, the hunter had declared. Cats were vain and cruel, always ready to turn on you. Elk and deer were prey. Wear their skins too long, and even the bravest man became a coward. Bears, boars, badgers, weasels. Some skins you never want to wear, boy. You won't like what you'd become. Birds were the worst, to hear him tell it. Men were not meant to leave the earth. Spend too much time in the clouds, and you never want to come back down again. I know skin changers who've tried hawks, owls, ravens. Even in their own skins, they sit moony, staring up at the bloody blue.
So this is why Haggon is such a cautious skin changer. With the previous lesson that skin changing can change you, we learned that some animals can have an adverse effect on the person. Remembering Varamyr was ambitious and with very powerful abilities, this is one lesson we imagine he resented his master for. Now next, there's a lesson about the South. The world beyond the wall is not for our kind, Haggon used to say. The free folk fear skin changers, but they honor us as well. South of the wall, the kneelers hunt us down and butcher us like pigs.
Yeah, not going south of the wall is a lesson Varamyr comes to regret ignoring. In fact, all of Haggon's lessons do seem like very wise counsel. And Varamyr does concede his master warned him as he comes to sincerely regret heading south. Yet he also blames Haggon for bringing him to Eastwatch and giving him southern ambitions in the first place. Next, we have the lessons about the code of honour among skin changers, the abominations. Man may eat the flesh of beasts, and beast the flesh of men, but the man who eats the flesh of man is an abomination. Abomination. That had always been Haggon's favourite word. Abomination, abomination, abomination. To eat of human meat was abomination, to mate as wolf with wolf was abomination, and to seize the body of another man was the worst abomination of all.
So, 3 abominations, 3 simple lessons that Haggon was trying to instill in his pupil, and yet Varamyr breaks every one of these taboos. We know he eats human flesh, and it's also revealed that he enjoys warging Sly while she's being mounted by the male wolves. So, another abomination. He's quite a strange guy, this Varamyr. Finally, we have the breaking of the final skin-changing taboo when he tries to take over Thistle, which we'll come to later. It's also worth noting that Bran Stark has now broken 2 of these 3 taboos, eating human flesh and inhabiting another person, Hodor. And he has also received somewhat similar lessons from Jojen about the perils of spending too much time working.
Anyway, with his talk of abominations, Varamyr judges Haggon to be weak and, quote, afraid of his own power. In actuality, Haggon was most likely wiser and more sensible than Varamyr. He refers to his teacher as the Hunter numerous times, and so we wonder if this was George's way of conveying the contrast between the pair. Being labelled the Hunter, this might imply that Haggon is using his gift to augment his real-world hunting skills. That might be the ends of his skin-changing ambitions to be a great hunter. Varamyr, on the other hand, has dreams of being king beyond the wall, and so contrasts in his ambitions, causing a conflict.
And at some point, this conflict spilled over, but not before Haggon had taught Varamyr about Second Life. He says, You'll die a dozen deaths, boy, and everyone will hurt. But when your true death comes, you will live again. The second life is simpler and sweeter, they say. And also, they say you forget, Haggon had told him a few weeks before his own death. When the man's flesh dies, his spirit lives on inside the beast, but every day his memory fades, and the beast becomes a little less a warg, a little more a wolf, until nothing of the man is left, and only the beast remains.
So Second Life seems like a nice pension plan for Haggon. The skin changer dies and then lives on and resides in the beast until his consciousness kind of melts away and joins with the beast's. It all sounds rather idyllic, I think. Whether the rules of Second Life are being laid out here to set a precedent for Second Life playing a role in Jon Snow's resurrection, we'll have to wait for the Winds of Winter to find out. But it does seem like a fair bet at this point. But anyway, we see Second Life with Orell, and here it's explained and laid out by Haggon. Unfortunately for him, a few weeks later, and he was dead with no Second Life. It must have been like getting your pension swindled.
Yeah, and there's ambiguity about exactly what happened, kind of like the death of Bump, but it seems like Varamyr killed Haggon. It says that the hunter died weeping after Varamyr took Greyskin from him, driving him out to claim the beast for his own. No second life for you, old man. Varamyr Sixskins, he'd called himself back then. Greyskin made 4, though the old wolf was frail and almost toothless, and soon followed Haggon into death.
So just putting the pieces together from the snippets of information we get, we think the sequence goes like this. Haggon was dying anyway, preparing for his second life inside his wolf, when Varamyr took over Greyskin, forced Haggon back into his own body, and then killed him and ate his heart, before returning back to his own body to burn what was left of Haggon in the wildling tradition, or perhaps to obscure the evidence.
So, this is the apex of the teacher-pupil conflict, and in stealing Haggon's second life, we can sense how spiteful Varamyr is. Greyskin, being shown to be very old and frail, near to death himself, shows us that there was really no gain for Varamyr in taking him. It was pure spite and hatred that drove him. No second life for you, old man, he thinks. And all this to the foster father, who seems to have been doing nothing more than helping Varamyr, with the act of devouring the man being the final insult to the lessons of his teacher. Varamyr recalls that the last thing he learned from Haggon was the taste of human flesh. And like Bump, Varamyr has to live with Haggon's shadow for the rest of his life. Still he haunts me, it says.
So that's the story of Varamyr and Haggon. Another great mini-story, I'm sure you'll agree. A well-trodden trope and a climax that sets the stage for Varamyr to become his own man. And in this sense, the eating of the heart of Haggon seems like a rite of passage and a fateful decision made at Varamyr's own crossroads. This act was a dismissal of the humanity that Haggon had shown him, and a taunting rejection of a basic code of conduct. Haggon was Varamyr's only family to speak of, underlining that he really is a man without boundaries. Thus far, to our knowledge, Varamyr has only broken taboos when inside his animal, a moral buffer for him, in his mind at least. But all that is about to change as Varamyr goes from boy to man and extends his list of abominations to those of human behaviour.
Welcome, listeners of Radio Westeros. 1 in every 1,000 is born a skin changer, so they say. This podcast has thousands of listeners, so there's some of yous out there that has the gift, no doubt. If you think you're one of them, then you're invited to Haggon's Skinchanging convention, north of the Wall. We got skin changers doing their tricks with elk and deer, Watch them become all cowardly. This folk'll go for cats, always vain and cruel. There's also those who go all moony, skin-changing those birds. We got good old Baroque with his boar, and Bria with the shadow cat, and even Grisella, that old goat woman. All animals will be provided for your skin-changing pleasure. Fair warning though, careful what animals you bond with. You might not like what you'd become. You wouldn't want to end up an abomination now, would you? Haggon's Skin-Changing Convention. Be the beast you've always wanted.
Okay, so now it's time to talk about Varamyr's adult life. When he killed Haggon, stealing his second life from him, he took Grey Skin as his own. Varamyr had called himself 3 Skins until that point, and Grey Skin made him 4 Skins. Sometime afterwards, he became 6 Skins, a man of formidable power within the wildling community, and with this power came further corruption. No longer a young boy who might be excused for making terrible mistakes, the devouring of Haggon seemed to spur Varamyr on, opening the door to a dark and sinister path.
And in the time before Mance Raider, before the wildlings had come together under a chosen leader, this path had manifested in a ruthless rule as a pseudo-lord. Somewhere along this timeline, he reflects that he had stolen, killed, raped. He had gorged on human flesh and lapped the blood of dying men as it gushed red and hot from their torn throats. He had stalked foes through the woods, fallen on them as they slept, clawed their entrails from their bellies, and scattered them across the muddy earth.
Yeah, notice that he's breaking human moral boundaries as well as those of skin changers. Haggon, on the one hand, succeeded in teaching him great skills, yet failed in taming the corruptible personality. So, in effect, he's created a monster and unleashed him among the wildlings. To go back to the Star Wars analogy, Varamyr has turned to the dark side.
And Varamyr acknowledges he was a lord of sorts, and it's true in a sense, but what he actually describes is an almost demigod status. He lives in Haggon's Hall, which he obviously took by illicit means, and is attended by his beasts. So he treats his animals like his thrall of personal servants, so there's more than a hint of a slavish undertone there.
And it says that a dozen villages did him homage in bread and salt and cider, offering him fruit from their orchards and vegetables from their gardens. So this is the lordship dynamic Varamyr alludes to. Although the essence of a feudalistic society historically is that it was a two-way arrangement. Fealty was given to the lord, but only in return for protection, governance, and land rights. There's no suggestion that Varamyr ever offered anything in return to his subjects, if you can call them that, and really the two reasons the villagers paid tribute had been spelled out by Haggon. The free folk fear skin changers, but they honor us as well.
Yeah, and they certainly must have feared Varamyr, and with good reason, but this honouring that's mentioned suggests to us that as a very powerful skin changer, who even shouts about his skills in his own name and title, Varamyr Sixskins might have been seen as a sort of demigod rather than a lord, and to imagine how in fear and awe of Varamyr these people must have been, listen to what he was doing to them, facilitated by his magical abilities. It says, whenever he desired a woman, he sent his shadow cat to stalk her, and whatever girl he'd cast his eye upon would follow meekly to his bed. Some came weeping, aye, but still they came. Varamyr gave them his seed, took a hank of their hair to remember them by, and sent them back. From time to time, some village hero would come with spear in hand to slay the beastling and save a sister or a lover or a daughter. Those he killed, but he never harmed the women. Some he even blessed with children.
Yeah, he basically had a free home, free food and meat, and could rape whomever he wanted without much consequence. Remember that young lump, who probably wasn't the most attractive creature, had dreamed of a day when bards would sing of his deeds and pretty girls would kiss him. You can imagine that within his corrupted mind, living this unaccountable life with so much power over people, his young ambitions were being fulfilled. Still, there's no account of anyone actually wanting Varamyr, who's described as fairly unremarkable without his beasts, which is pertinent later on.
And it's worth mentioning the children that he, quote, blessed upon his rape victims. He thinks of them as small, puny things, like Lump. And notice that he thinks of Lump in the third person, as if he were someone else. But anyway, as far as we know, he doesn't actually try to be a father to any of these children. He continues to live alone, showing us that the price for all his selfishness and his crimes is an isolation augmented by the hauntings of his past. Aside from looking down on his own children for looking like him, he's also disappointed they don't have his gift, as if that were now the only thing important to him. Incidentally, one of Varamyr's children is briefly mentioned in A Dance with Dragons. It says, "Of a certain runty, rat-faced boy, Tormund said, 'That one's a whelp of Varamyr Sixskins. You remember Varamyr, Lord Crow?' He did. 'The skin changer.' Aye, he was that. A vicious little runt besides."
Yeah, it's interesting how the word runt comes up there, remembering the Lump backstory. And speaking of rejection of family, we discover that Varamyr actually had returned to his mother and father at some point. It says, years later, he had tried to find his parents to tell them that their Lump had become the great Varamyr Sixskins, but both of them were dead and burned.
So, the great Varamyr, as he so modestly puts it, is a man still pining for the approval of his parents. In spite of all he has done and will do, he is still a boy at heart. Perhaps all he ever wanted was the acceptance of his own parents, and who knows how he would have turned out if they hadn't instilled him with a sense of rejection and inferiority.
Anyway, Varamyr must have lived his lordly, nearly demigod existence for some time. And it's worth remembering that young Lump had had dreams of becoming king beyond the wall, so a penny for Varamyr's thoughts when a new leader came along and did exactly that, Mance Raider.
Yeah, Mance united the wildlings, and in contrast to Varamyr, he used negotiation, interpersonal skills, and his affable personality to bind the wildlings together behind a common cause. Little is known of any negotiations between Mance and Varamyr, who you would imagine would not be one to be ushered down by any leadership hierarchy. But looking closely at the text, there are clues as to what happened.
When Varamyr is lying in the snow, dying in A Dance with Dragons, he thinks of, quote, the warm lands beyond the wall that Mance used to sing about, and this links with an earlier observation about Varamyr. Remember where his southern ambitions came from? It was there at Eastwatch by the sea that the boy he'd been first began to dream of the warm south. And later, Varamyr is dying and regretting his decision to go south with Mance. He thinks of Haggon warning him as such, but he's also clearly resentful. You warned me, Varamyr thought, but it was you who showed me Eastwatch too.
So putting the pieces together, it seems to us that Varamyr wanted to go south because of his time at Eastwatch, and when Mance came along, he talked Varamyr into being one of his lieutenants by selling Varamyr dreams of a life in the south. Later we get this. I sat at the right hand of Mance Raider. It was Mance who brought me to this place. I should not have listened. I should have slipped inside my bear and torn him to pieces. So a really clear hint that Varamyr was listening to Mance, that's the language used, that he'd been talked round, explaining why this demigod chose to accept a position of subordination in effect, in addition, of course, to the looming threat of the others. Despite ultimately regretting this alliance, there are hints that Varamyr was in fact rather proud to be associated with the King Beyond the Wall, as you would expect of most wildlings. Highlighting the pride he felt, Varamyr recalls himself breaking bread with Mance Raider.
Yeah, and details of Varamyr's time under Mance's command before a Storm of Swords are scarce, but there is one tiny thing. Varamyr remembers the golden arm rings Mance had given him, and we think these were probably torque bands. In cultures such as Celtic, British, and Viking communities, torques identified those having a higher rank or someone otherwise distinguished as a warrior or a leader. Mance giving torques to Varamyr might symbolize Mance giving and Varamyr accepting a high place in the wildling hierarchy. It's also worth noting that Tormund wears golden torques, quote, thick gold bands graven with runes, it says, and Craster also wears one. And torques are mentioned among the wildlings' possessions when they hand them over to the Night's Watch. So it seems like they are very traditional north of the Wall, and they're probably potent, symbolic gifts.
And before we get to the Storm of Swords timeline, there's just one final snippet of information about Sixskins. As we know, he began to increasingly skin change various animals as Varamyr, and his fourth skin was grey skin, but he goes on to have 6 skins from his name and title in Storm, and he has a female snow bear, 3 wolves, and a shadow cat, so that's 5. Maybe he's including his own skin for 6, possibly. But he's possessed many animals. Remember that he's died 9 deaths before his true death. Aside from the blow to the father's axe, he recalls that he died once from a spear thrust, once with the bear's teeth in his throat, and once in a wash of blood as he brought forth a stillborn cub.
Yeah, and that last one, for anyone that missed it, is describing Varamyr skin-changing a female bear who is pregnant and dies in childbirth. This Varamyr character has truly lived. And the strangest thing about this scenario, if it could get any stranger, is that Varamyr had to have chosen to inhabit the bear as she was giving birth. It wasn't just some strange accident, but Varamyr's own choice.
Yes, the Lyanna Stark of the bear world. Varamyr, we salute you. Anyway, let's get to the Storm of Swords timeline. Through Jon's eyes, we get our first introduction to the man. Varamyr Sixskins, a small mouse of a man whose steed was a savage white snow bear that stood 13 feet tall on its hind legs. And wherever the bear and Varamyr went, 3 wolves and a shadow cat came following. Jon had been in his presence only once, and once had been enough. The mere sight of the man had made him bristle, even as the fur on the back of Ghost's neck had bristled at the sight of the bear and that long black and white cat.
Notice that the only thing notably fearsome about Varamyr is his animals. As he later thinks in his own point of view, without his beasts, he did not look like a great man, and George takes another opportunity to describe him as a mouse of a man again. George has said when he creates his characters, he knows the backstories of all of them, so we wonder if here he already knew about Varamyr being the runt of the pack in his early life. Being described in such a way makes his magical abilities seem almost compensatory for his weak physique.
And we don't just get to see Varamyr through Jon's eyes. Via the prologue, we actually get the reverse. It says, he had known what snow was the moment he saw that great white direwolf stalking silent at his side. One skin changer can always sense another. So this is really interesting information, and as we've said, there's a definite exposition element to Varamyr in regards to skin changing and Second Life. Here we get yet another rule of the skin changer. Varamyr could sense the gift was strong in Jon, if unpolished, and yet we learn that Varamyr really wanted to take control of Ghost. Quote, Mance should have let me take the direwolf. There would be a Second Life worthy of a king.
So, Mance stopped Varamyr taking Ghost, and we grimace at the thought, and the next time you are reading A Storm of Swords, keep that in mind when Varamyr is introduced. Also, this line, "there would be a second life worthy of a king," can be read as both an allusion to a second life in Ghost and to Jon being a king of some sort, so potentially a very loaded line there.
And we get more on Varamyr and Jon when we discover that taking over Orell's eagle had caused Varamyr to dislike Jon. It says, when he claimed the eagle that had been Orell's, he could feel the other Skinchanger raging at his presence. Orell had been slain by the turncloak crow Jon Snow, and his hate for his killer had been so strong that Varamyr found himself hating the beastling boy as well.
So, Orell was an eagle skin changer who was killed by Jon and so spends his second life in his eagle, which then predictably displays a distaste for Jon. The eagle, being a useful spy, is taken over by Varamyr. Remembering Haggon's lesson that a skin-changing relationship goes two ways and that the beast affects you in return, Orell starts to seep into Varamyr, and Sixskins thus absorbs some of his hatred for Jon. Despite being strictly in the bracket of fantasy, George has clearly given these mechanics a lot of thought.
Yeah, he has. I really think it adds a lot of depth. And on the subject of Orell's eagle, we get to the battle at the wall. Varamyr is at the wildling encampment with Jon, where he's left to guard Mance's pregnant wife Dalla, remembering all the beasts at his disposal. And at the same time, he's using the eagle as a kind of spy drone when he sees troops arriving. Here's the passage. "Banners," he heard Varamyr murmur. "I see golden banners. Oh." A mammoth lumbered by, trumpeting, a half-dozen bowmen in the wooden tower on its back. "The king? No." Then the skin changer threw back his head and screamed. The sound was shocking, ear-piercing, thick with agony. Varamyr fell writhing, and the cat was screaming too. And high, high in the eastern sky, against the wall of cloud, Jon saw the eagle burning. For a heartbeat it flamed brighter than a star, wreathed in red and gold and orange, its wings beating wildly at the air, as if it could fly from the pain. Higher it flew and higher still. The scream brought Val out of the tent, white-faced. "What is it? What's happening?" Varamyr's wolves were fighting each other, and the shadow cat had raced off into the trees, but the man was still twisting on the ground. "What's wrong with him?" Val demanded, horrified.
The confusion over what had happened to Varamyr here from the characters is mirrored by the reader, and it remains a mystery until Jon talks to Melisandre later at Castle Black. "You had put the wildlings to flight, and the skin changer Mance had left to guard his queen went mad when the eagle burned." Jon looked at Melisandre. "Some say that was your doing." She smiled, her long copper hair tumbling across her face. "The Lord of Light has fiery talons, Jon Snow."
And from Varamyr himself we get this. "His last death had been by fire. I burned." At first, in his confusion, he thought some archer on the wall had pierced him with a flaming arrow. But the fire had been inside him, consuming him, and the pain. And we also have this. Even that had not been so agonizing as the fire in his guts, crackling along his wings, devouring him. When he tried to fly from it, his terror fanned the flames and made them burn hotter. One moment he had been soaring above the wall, his eagle's eyes marking the movements of the men below. Then the flames had turned his heart into a blackened cinder and sent his spirit screaming back into his own skin. And for a little while he'd gone mad. Even the memory was enough to make him shudder.
So Varamyr, who for so long used his magical abilities to take advantage of women, is now on the receiving end of magic from a woman, Melisandre Vashai, using her powers to burn the bird mid-flight, killing the eagle and the remnants of Arel, and giving Varamyr his 9th animal death in an agonizing fashion. And with the arrival of Stannis Baratheon, his army scattering the wildlings into a chaotic stampede, we get the last of Varamyr in a storm of swords. Jon thinks, even Varamyr fled, crawling off on his hands and knees.
So you can imagine this powerful, feared man now literally brought to his knees by the surprise attack. He crawled right out of the story and was a welcome surprise addition to the prologue roster 11 years later when Dance was released. So far, we've seen Varamyr journey from village outcast to proud lieutenant of Mance Raider and his united host. And now we'll see him fall from grace as he faces death, despair and destitution. Next up, we'll explore what happened to Varamyr after the eagle burned and consider the events of the prologue on the timeline. To lead us in, here's a reading from the beginning of Varamyr's prologue in A Dance with Dragons.
The night was rank with the smell of man. The warg stopped beneath a tree and sniffed, his grey-brown fur dappled by shadow. A sigh of piney wind brought the man scent to him, over fainter smells that spoke of fox and hare, seal and stag, even wolf. Those were man smells too, the warg knew, the stink of old skins, dead and sour, near drowned beneath the stronger scents of smoke and blood and rot. Only man stripped the skins from other beasts and wore their hides and hair. Wargs have no fear of man, as wolves do. Hate and hunger coiled in his belly, and he gave a low growl, calling to his one-eyed brother, to his small, sly sister. As he raced through the trees, his packmates followed hard on his heels. They had caught the scent as well. As he ran, he saw through their eyes too, and glimpsed himself ahead. The breath of the pack puffed warm and white from long grey jaws. Ice had frozen between their paws, hard as stone, but the hunt was on now, the prey ahead. Flesh, the warg thought. Meat.
So an atmospheric reading there from the start of the prologue, and it sets up the chapter very well. And before we analyse the events from the prologue, let's fill in the blanks as to what happened to Varamyr as Stannis arrived, as we kind of drip-fed details through the chapter. When we left Varamyr in Storm, he was crawling away from the attack of Stannis' army, writhing in agony. Mance had entrusted him with guarding his pregnant wife, so with his high standing in the wildling hierarchy, he would surely be expected to stand up and be counted to help fight against the foe.
But, as we know, Varamyr's power comes from his animals, and with the eagle dead and the master incapacitated, his animal thralls ran amok in the wake of the attack. He thinks that he'd, quote, lost control of his other beasts in the agony of the eagle's death. His shadowcat had raced into the woods, whilst his snow bear turned her claws on those around her, ripping apart 4 men before falling to a spear. She would have slain Varamyr had he come within her reach. The bear hated him, had raged each time he wore her skin or climbed upon her back.
So there, proof that those animals didn't necessarily want to be subordinate to Varamyr. It's not like the relationship the Starks have with their wolves, for example, or for that matter, that Varamyr seems to have with his wolves. Also, Haggon had warned against the perils of skin-changing certain beasts, like cats, so we can imagine this relationship would have affected Varamyr and perhaps fed his corruption. Anyway, unable to control the beasts, Varamyr here lost them, save the wolves, and became considerably less formidable.
And Varamyr managed to run away from the wildling defeat. He thinks, I burned and I died, and then I ran, half mad with pain and terror. The memories still shamed him, but he had not been alone. Others had run as well, hundreds of them, thousands. The battle was lost. The knights had come, invincible in their steel, killing everyone who stayed to fight. It was run or die.
So the great Varamyr is a coward at heart, and the moment he lost his beasts, he was exposed as such. He left all his goods behind and ran into the woods, even leaving behind the golden torques from Mance. Such a swift uprooting did, however, allow a change of identity, remembering he'd shamefully abandoned his post. Varamyr became Haggon, a persona he later regrets taking. It says, "I ate his heart and drank his blood, and still he haunts me."
Varamyr's decision to flee without his belongings also proves to be a fateful one. It says he left behind his sleeping pelts and woolen small clothes, his sheepskin boots and fur-lined gloves, and this left Varamyr exposed to the elements, so much so that in his freezing desperation, he sought to take a squirrel-skin cloak from a dead woman. With a hint of irony, and how George must have chuckled to himself, the character Sixskins, he who spends his time slipping into the skins of enthralled animals, gets mortally wounded for stealing a skin.
Yeah, with his cloaks left at the wall, Varamyr attempted to take one from a female corpse who in the panic had been killed by a Hornfoot man. But her young son had burst from nowhere and stabbed Varamyr with a bone knife. And the wildlings had scattered, some trying to return to their homes, some attempting a second attack, but after a while, hunger, cold and sickness became the real enemy. With a bleeding wound, Varamyr faced a certain and painful death. However, part of Varamyr's group, which was getting smaller and smaller it seems, was a spearwife called Thistle. She swallows this Haggon lie and tends to Varamyr, stitching up his wound and generally caring for him. You have to remember that Varamyr still seems to pine for the love of his mother, and he still laments that she never cried for him, and here is Thistle caring for him in an altruistic and even motherly way.
And in spite of this, Varamyr is quick to find fault in Thistle, noting her physical ugliness when he describes her as warty, windburnt, and wrinkled. And it's worth bearing in mind that despite the impression here that she's an old hag, Varamyr thinks of her as having a young body later on, so she's almost certainly younger than he. Definitely not like an old witch if you got that impression. And anyway, he uses the name Haggon to trick her.
Yeah, he takes this Haggon moniker as part of his ruse, and as the group of wildlings thins, some going their own direction and some dying, Thistle becomes Varamyr's last companion. He's slowly dying, he needs care, and this Thistle shows him loyalty and compassion. He repays her by hatching a plan to commit what Haggon had described as the blackest sin of all, the worst abomination. Desperate to live, Varamyr wants to skin change Thistle and steal her body for good. When the prologue begins, which is where we are on the timeline right now, Varamyr and Thistle have arrived in an abandoned wildling village. We tried to figure out which village this is, and we couldn't quite get there, although we're pretty sure that it's not Whitetree because of the Weirwood description, which is fairly unremarkable, in contrast with Whitetree's massive tree with a carved mouth large enough to hold a sheep. So probably not Whitetree.
Yeah, probably not. And Thistle has temporarily left Varamyr alone in this village in order to scavenge for food for the both of them, and his wolves at this time are leagues away. So the chapter begins with Varamyr inside his wolves, as we heard in the reading. He describes a human baby as a pup, icicles as swords, and spears as teeth and claws. It's immediately clear that this character is not just a warg, but one who's fallen in deep. Varamyr and the wolves are hunting humans, and the combination of the wolves' animal savagery and Varamyr's human wisdom is lethal. The males are killed with ease before the woman and her baby are eaten. It's a sickening scene that sets a dark mood for the chapter, and we then see that Varamyr lies in a hut. His successful hunt provides temporary respite for him. However, he's nourishing his wolves' bodies, not his own.
And he justifies his abominations in two ways. He disconnects his ethics while skin changing from those in his real life. And he thinks of his deeds as a mercy to his victims, like he's doing them a favour. In both cases, Varamyr's justifications are preposterous, and mixed in with snippets of the Haggon and Bump tales, a picture is being painted of a monster, or if you will, a beast. And by now, the reader has been informed that this is indeed Varamyr, it's confirmed, and that he is gravely and mortally wounded.
And as he lies incapacitated, he recalls more of the backstory that we've already been through, and as he remembers burning inside Orell's eagle, his fire goes out. In a great moment of juxtaposition, Varamyr goes from fire and burning to ice and freezing. He's now susceptible to the cold and unable to fend for himself, and he faces a final death, the mirror opposite of his last. His only hope is Thistle, who despite her efforts does not receive so much as a kind thought. The only redeeming quality we can find in him so far is that he at least acknowledges that he was at fault for, quote, all the wrongs he had done in his long life. Despite Varamyr being an unquestionably dark character, in fact the worst of all point-of-view characters by some margin, the backstories with Lump and Haggon do provide intrigue and elevate him to what we would call a complex villain.
When he realises his hut has become snowed under, he loses hope and begins to plan his second life. Bizarrely, but perhaps unsurprisingly for a man without boundaries, he wants to eat his own flesh whilst inside a wolf. Again, there's something decidedly animal about the way Varamyr's mind works. This is his plan if he's left alone to die, yet he still prays for the return of Thistle, and we soon realise that his dastardly plan is to steal her skin and live the rest of his life as the Spearwife, where he would be unable to warg, unable to escape. Say what you will about Varamyr Sixskins, but here is a man desperate to survive by any means necessary.
With no Thistle in sight, Varamyr leaves the confines of his hut, searching for food, and collapses in front of the village weirwood. For a man whose story is so often punctuated by unspeakable sin, his thoughts are almost religious. The gods are weighing me. A shiver went through him. He had done bad things, terrible things. He had stolen, killed, raped. He had gorged on human flesh and lapped the blood of dying men as it gushed red and hot from their torn throats. He had stalked foes through the woods, fallen on them as they slept, clawed their entrails from their bellies and scattered them across the muddy earth. How sweet their meat had tasted. That was the beast, not me, he said in a hoarse whisper. That was the gift you gave me.
So here's a character who's almost compelled to carry out these terrible deeds, who believes that the victims of his murders are now all around him, witnessing his further crimes. How that must have tormented him and played on his mind over the years. Still, he can't help himself, and rather than cease his folly after the bump incident, he continues along a really awful path, blaming his corruption on the gods themselves for the dark power bestowed upon him via the gift of skin changing. Experiencing this moment of confused regret and judgment, Varamyr lies in the snow before the red eyes of the weirwood and, closing his eyes, dreams his old dream of 2 brothers and 3 dogs.
And the tale of Bump gives depth to the chapter and to Varamyr's character, and it comes very late in the chapter, before he attempts to commit the darkest sin of all. Sometimes the reveal of a hidden tragedy or a childhood trauma in a character's story offers the chance of a redemption of some sort. Varamyr was a 6-year-old boy who simply wanted positive attention from his parents and committed a terrible act. So there is some grounds, at least, to feel sympathetic towards him. Yet George rips Varamyr from this dream that functions as a confessional and has him immediately try to skin change Thistle, who reappears bringing news of some enemy arriving nearby. Get up, we have to go. There are hundreds of them. Get up, they're coming.
Yeah, and so this path to redemption being ignored, the stage is now set. Thistle has been wonderful to Varamyr by tending to his wounds and scouting for their food. We've already been told that Haggon rates this as the number 1 abomination. Varamyr is posing as Haggon, so we'll commit the final abomination under his name. And to top it all, they were in front of the weirwood eyes of his own gods. This is the ultimate dark maneuver, and when Varamyr leaps from his own skin and into Thistle's, he is renouncing any moral code of man, of skin changers, or of his gods. In terms of writing, it's the perfect crime to end Varamyr's story, we think, and the results of his actions are nothing short of bewildering.
Yeah, true. Varamyr hears the word abomination as he makes the leap, but he doesn't know if it comes from Thistle, from himself, or from Haggon. She screams, arching her back, shouting, "Get out!" and trying to fight him off. After a titanic struggle, Thistle begins to harm herself to purge him from her body, biting off their tongue and gouging at their eyes. Thistle has grown so disturbed by the intrusion that she's gone mad, and Varamyr's also in agony, quote, drowning in blood and pain and madness. All the agony he's brought to Thistle is for naught, as she refuses to let him take her over. It's a horrific sequence, witnessing just how much distress this kind of mind rape causes the victim, and it highlights why this is considered even worse than skin change or cannibalism. This is, quite simply, an abomination.
Yeah, Haggon had that one right. And by this time, the enemy are approaching. Thistle had mentioned hundreds of them, no doubt referring to wights, and with the temperature dropping so much that Varamyr's hand gets frozen to the ground right before his fateful leap into Thistle, it seems like their masters were present as well. With Thistle spitting out their collective tongue, Varamyr starts to die. It says, "The white world turned and fell away. For a moment it was as if he were hiding inside the weirwood, gazing out through carved red eyes as a dying man twitched feebly on the ground, and a madwoman danced blind and bloody underneath the moon, weeping red tears and ripping at her clothes. Then both were gone, and he was rising, melting, his spirits borne on some cold wind. He was in the snow and in the clouds. He was a sparrow, a squirrel, an oak. A horned owl flew silently between his trees, hunting a hare. Varamyr was inside the owl, inside the hare, inside the trees. Deep below the frozen ground, earthworms burrowed blindly in the dark, and he was them as well. I am the wood and everything that's in it, he thought, exulting. 100 ravens took to the air, cawing as they felt him pass. A great elk trumpeted, unsettling the children clinging to his back. A sleeping direwolf raised his head to snarl at empty air. Before their hearts could beat again, he had passed on, searching for his own, for One Eye, Sly, and Stalker, for his pack. His wolves would save him, he told himself. That was his last thought as a man.
So first of all, note that he sees Bran and his companions, and likely Summer there. And there are ideas in the fandom that Varamyr becoming the tree temporarily indicates that he's a green seer and that he's skin changed the tree, and then all of those animals mentioned. We want to offer another explanation as to what's happening in this passage. You have to remember the context of the chapter. Through this prologue, we're told that Varamyr believes when a person dies, they become part of the trees, part of nature. Here are some quotes. First of all, this is what he thought happened to Lump. "Your little one is with the gods now," the Woods Witch told his mother as she wept. "He'll never hurt again, never hunger, never cry. The gods have taken him down into the earth, into the trees. The gods are all around us, in the rocks, in the streams, and in the birds and the beasts. Your Bump has gone to join them. He'll be the world and all that's in it."
And we get something similar when he thinks of his parents. Years later, he had tried to find his parents to tell them that their Lump had become the great Varamyr Sixskins, but both of them were dead and burned, gone into the trees and streams, gone into the rocks and earth, gone to dirt and ashes. That was what the Woods Witch had told his mother the day Bump died.
So yeah, the Woods Witch really affected Varamyr, and we can thus understand his belief system and that of the wildlings. We wonder if the sequence with the weirwood and the other trees and all the animals is simply Varamyr dying in accordance with what he believed, becoming a part of the trees and so on, as he thinks, "I am the wood and everything that's in it," which paraphrases what the Woods Witch said about his little brother before attempting to find his wolves for his second life. It's also notable that it says that Lump did not want to be a clod of earth, perhaps explaining why Varamyr was so desperate to steal Thistle's skin and live on, even giving up his magical powers to do so. It seems to us that the Woods Witch at Bump's funeral had a similar impact on Varamyr to that of Maggie the Frog on Cersei.
Yeah, an interesting comparison in light of how we started this podcast with those similar quotes, if you'll remember. And as Varamyr makes a connection with one eye, his body finally dies. The sensation is described as a shock of cold, as if he had been plunged into icy waters of a frozen lake. And this is interesting, since the last words in Jon's final POV in Dance, after he's stabbed, indicate that he was feeling only the cold, but not the physical wounds.
Yeah, so some definite fodder for the notion that Jon Snow entered second life there, as we covered in our Jon episode. And then through One Eye's point of view, Varamyr sees Thistle, who's now a white. While Varamyr had clearly abandoned his body to die, it's left ambiguous how he and Thistle actually finally did die, whether it was from their physical tussle, whether the whites killed them, or whether it was from a deadly ice mist that the others are said to bring, remembering that Varamyr's hand was frozen to the ground. Anyway, as he sees Thistle from his second life, it says that a part of him grieved for what he had lost, and another part for what he'd done. So while we think he's grieving for his lost opportunity to survive in Thistle's body, it seems like Varamyr, this most despicable of characters, does have a conscience, and grieving for what he had done might indicate that, despite his descriptions of her scrawny, warty ugliness, maybe he held Thistle in some affection. She had been kind and motherly and had a young body after all, and remembering that without his beasts, the man Varamyr was no prize, at the very least, she wasn't deserving of the fate he'd consigned her to.
Yeah, that's right, because Thistle is now undead. She has blue light flickering in the pits where her eyes had been before she'd clawed them out, and the blood on her fingers is now frozen into icicles. It's hard to say who was more cruel to Thistle, the others or Varamyr. The chapter ends with a simple 3 words, words that bring us right back to an earlier time in Varamyr's life. She sees me.
And so Varamyr's torment begins once again, just as with Bump, who could see him too. It's a fantastic way to end a great story. It's one that we both really love, and we hope that love was conveyed today. We've heard it said that the purpose of this prologue is to inform the reader about skin-changing and second life, especially as it pertains to Bran and Jon. And while this may be the case, this is not simply an exhibition chapter. It's deep, dark, and complex, just like the villain that George created here with Varamyr. His story is woven together masterfully, and it improves with each reread. We both rate this prologue very highly indeed. And its similarity to the Game of Thrones prologue, with Waymar and Thistle both rising as whites right at the end, brings us full circle back to what's really another highly rated prologue, that of the Night's Watchman Will. And before we get to the credits, we have our final reading today. Here is the beginning of Varamyr's second life in the Wolf One Eye.
True death came suddenly. He felt a shock of cold, as if he had been plunged into the icy waters of a frozen lake. Then he found himself rushing over moonlit snows with his packmate close behind him. Half the world was dark. One Eye, he knew. He bayed, and Sly and Stalker gave echo. When they reached the crest, the wolves paused. Thistle, he remembered, and a part of him grieved for what he had lost, and another part for what he'd done. Below, the world had turned to ice. Fingers of frost crept slowly up the weirwood, reaching out for each other. The empty village was no longer empty. Blue-eyed shadows walked among the mounds of snow. Some wore brown, and some wore black, and some were naked, their flesh gone white as snow. A wind was sighing through the hills, heavy with their scents: dead flesh, dry blood, skins that stank of mould and rot and urine. Sly gave a growl and bared her teeth, her ruff bristling. Not men, not prey, not these. The things below moved, but did not live. One by one they raised their heads towards the three wolves on the hill. The last to look was the thing that had been Thistle. She wore wool and fur and leather, and over that she wore a coat of hoarfrost that crackled when she moved and glistened in the moonlight. Pale pink icicles hung from her fingertips, 10 long knives of frozen blood. And in the pits where her eyes had been, a pale blue light was flickering, lending her coarse features an eerie beauty they had never known in life. She sees me.
Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed our look at Varamyr Sixskins. And as usual, it's time for us to give credit where credit is due. Thanks, as always, to George R.R. Martin for writing this amazing chapter, and to Kevin MacLeod and Chris Zabriskie for allowing us to use their music in our production. And because this is a special Patrons episode, we want to end today with thanks to all of our patrons and shout-outs for all of our patrons from the Valyrian Steel and Castle Steel levels. So, thanks to Alexis, Amber, Jessica, Kurt, Joe, Chris K, June, Monica, Joy B, Ben H, Jax Cato, Corliss Valerian, Vasily, Fatima, John H, Adam, Cinder of the Citadel, Mary H of House Stark, Marja the Mage, Lady of the Frostfangs, Rusted Revolver, and Lady Direliz of Castle Naki, the Alpha Patron. And thanks as well go out to AJ, Arion, Princess Zendiko of the Summer Isles, Chris V, David Dampshorts of the Farallon Islands, Direwolf, Anzonio, Greg, JM, Brendan Beefish of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire, John of House Dane, Liz, Marilyn, Melitza, Rebecca, Steve, The Working Dead, Zainab, James B, Curveball, Mossman, Jeff Gnarly the Long Snapper, Septa Smashley, Ashy, and Rebecca Q. And continuing on, we have thanks to Jean A, Megan E, George K, Yvonne, Aerodo, Anne, Sully, Christina, Clay, Demetrios, Edwin, Faceless Miami Man, Jim McGeehan of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire, Eoin Longbeard the Well-Read, Wine Gobbler from Ultima Thule, JT was here, Monaro Geek TV, Sir Matt of Wareside, Patrick, Scott, Tammy, Tim, and finally, Lord Brandon Brewer of Castle Blackroon, sworn alesmith to House Stark, Grand Master of the Zithomancers Guild, and Keeper of the Buzz. As always, let me know if I pronounced any of your names wrong, or if you have a nickname you'd prefer to use. Visit RadioWesteros.com for quick access to all our podcasts. You can also comment on our content there, or find us on YouTube, and of course you can connect with us via Twitter, Facebook, Google+, or Tumblr. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you soon with another episode. Bye for now.